Well, we're giving it to the woman. She is the indirect object, and the indirect object is the dative case. So we know that it's a feminine relative pronoun. It's in the dative case. What happens to a feminine article when it's in the dative case? Because it's the same on almost all counts as the changes to the relative pronoun. Well, in the dative case, feminine article changes to der. So right here, the relative pronoun also is a der, because it's in the dative case, because it's an indirect object. That woman was strange, and it was very hard to figure out what to do with as well. Der Mann mit something ich gegessen habe wird dicht sein. So the man who I've eaten with will become fat. He must have eaten a lot of food. What are we referring to here? What is our antecedent? Well, we're referring to the man, aren't we? So it's going to be a masculine relative pronoun. But look, there's a mit here. We know that the mit is acting upon our relative pronoun because it's come to the front with it. We know that mit triggers the dative case. We know that our relative pronoun is masculine. We know that a masculine article in the dative case becomes a dem. We know that our relative pronoun is dem. Very good. Here's where this one's going to trick you. Die Kinder mit something, ich spiele, sind freundlich. So the children that I play with are friendly. Well, what is our antecedent here? What is the thing we're referring to? The children that I play with are friendly. Referring to die Kinder. But whoa, be careful. Die Kinder is plural, not feminine. So we have a plural relative pronoun here. We can see here that mit is acting upon our plural relative pronoun. And we know that mit triggers the dative case. So what is the dative plural relative pronoun? Oh, it's irregular. It's denen, not den. It's denen. It's one of the irregular ones. In fact, it's the only irregular one that's not in the dative case. And when I say irregular, I mean when you compare it to the normal article changes. Next sentence. Die Straße. That is past my house is long. So what's our antecedent? What are we referring to here? Well, we're referring to die Straße. We know that die Straße is feminine. So we know that we have a feminine relative pronoun. Now hold on a second. See this nach here? Why isn't this nach in front of the relative pronoun? Well, it's because nach, we're talking about something being past my house. Yeah, it's not related to die Straße that we're referring to. So whenever there is a preposition in our relative clause, it doesn't necessarily mean that it moves to the front of the relative clause. The preposition has to be acting upon or referring to our relative pronoun for it to come to the front. So in this sentence, we know that we have a feminine relative pronoun because our antecedent is a D word. Now let's find out what's happening to our feminine relative pronoun in our relative clause. Well, the street that's past my house is long, so die Straße ist nach meinem Haus. We can rearrange it like that. Oh, we see that it's in the nominative case. It's not a direct object. It's not an indirect object. It's not in the genitive case. It's in the nominative case. And we know what happens to D in the nominative case. I mean a feminine noun in the nominative case. We know what the article is. We know that it's D. We know that our relative pronoun is going to read D as well. Die Straße, die nach meinem Haus ist lange. Now we're going to look at word order in the relative clause in more depth than we did before. In the present perfect tense, haben oder sein goes to the end of the relative clause behind the past participle. Here's an example. Ich habe einen Apfel, den ich gekauft habe, gegessen. I have an apple that I have eaten. I've eaten an apple that I've bought. Notice that habe is at the end of the relative clause, not gekauft or anything else. Habe is at the end of the relative clause. And if we forget about the relative pronoun, and if we rewrote this sentence just normally, it would be ich habe den Apfel gekauft with the past participle in the last position. But because we introduced the relative pronoun den, habe is pushed to the end and it remains in its finite form. So it stays as habe. Do you notice that? So, den ich habe gekauft, that I have bought. Okay, so habe goes to the end in the present perfect tense, or sign if it's sign, say if something has died or wakes up. So you understand that? The relative pronoun moves habe behind the past participle, and it stays in its finite form, so it has to still agree with the noun. With the subject. Modal verbs. The modal verb moves to the end in its finite form, so in its form that agrees with the subject of the relative clause. Ich habe einen Apfel, den ich kaufen soll, gegessen. This person has eaten an apple that they should buy, which means they probably haven't bought it already. Pretty naughty. So if we look at this sentence and forget about there being a relative pronoun there, we would see that traditionally the sentence would be Ich soll den Apfel kaufen. I should buy the apple. Notice that kaufen is in its infinitive form because of the modal verb. Notice that the modal verb is soll because of the subject ich. But when we add den, and this den Apfel should go away as well, when we add den, it pushes soll to the end of the sentence, behind kaufen. And notice that soll stays in its finite form, so it still agrees with the subject. So that's how we get den ich kaufen soll. Okay, so when using a modal verb in your relative clause, the modal verb goes to the end of the relative clause, behind the verb in its infinitive form, in its finite form. Werden, if you're going to use werden, then werden moves to the end of the sentence, just like with modal verbs. Here's an example. Der Apfel, den ich essen werde, ist rot. If we write this normally, forgetting about relative pronouns, it would be ich werde den Apfel essen. Yeah? But because we have a relative pronoun, werde is moved to the end of the sentence behind essen. And so we get this. Den ich essen werde. Seeing that werde is still in its finite form, it's still agreeing with the subject of the sentence ich. Separable verbs, they're pretty tricky. Here's an example of a separable verb. We can see that the prefix of the verb has actually joined up with its stem that's still agreeing with the subject of the sentence. If we wrote this normally, forgetting about relative pronouns, it would be ich mache das Fenster auf. Okay, notice how the prefix and the stem are separated, and notice how the stem agrees with the subject, ich. But because it's in a relative clause and there's a relative pronoun, the relative pronoun reunites the prefix auf and the stem mache in its finite form, so in its form that agrees with the subject, at the end of the sentence. And that's how we get that. The prefix and the stem have been reunited at the back of the relative clause, and the stem still agrees with the subject of the relative clause ich. Okay guys, so thanks for watching this presentation on relative pronouns. Be sure to comment if you have any questions. Now, if you are in need of further help with relative pronouns, or if you want a bit clearer explanation, there is a really good website here. Here's its URL. It's www.nthulleen.com. Then you can probably go from there, look through finding grammar, teaching, and relative pronouns. There'll be somewhere on the site. Probably a Google would be best. But this website explains relative pronouns in really simple terms. You have a table like the one I showed you that shows us the nominative, accusative, and dative changes to the relative pronoun. It has some steps here if you need some more, if you're a person who likes to follow steps. And there are worksheets on here too. Some of these worksheets can be a bit tricky down here, but you can always ask a German person or a German teacher for help. Thanks for listening to my presentation on relative pronouns. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to leave comments, rate, and subscribe. See ya!